Once again, New York has a new congressional map. At the start of the week, the Democratic-controlled state legislature voted to reject the newly drawn congressional map created by the Independent Redistricting Commission. You may remember the IRC was tasked with creating new districts back in December. Last week, the body unveiled a map that offered little help to Democrats as the party vies to gain control of the House of Representatives.
I think there are numerous problems with the map that was sent to us that run afoul of the constitutional guidelines that exist in our state constitution. Most notably, there are a half a dozen county cuts, places where counties were divided newly in this new map from the existing districts.
And political pundits and stakeholders went on to wait with bated breath to see if the legislature would advance the map. Ultimately, both chambers voted to reject it, and Republicans blasted Democrats for what they described as not respecting the work of the commission or New Yorkers.
You know, I hear a lot in this House about protecting democracy and the will of the people, and the reality is the people did speak. They spoke in a constitutional amendment that they wanted to eliminate this behind closed doors way of drawing redistricting maps. And it was created the IRC with that. And that was the people speaking, saying, let's change this process. Let's make it a more honest and open process.
And shortly after rejecting the map, Democrats went on to produce their own, which it turns out didn't offer major changes from what was drawn by the commission and showed marginal shifts to districts. To no surprise, Democrats voted to advance their map and were even joined by some Republicans in both chambers. Governor Kathy Hochul officially signed the new maps into law on Wednesday evening. So it seems the redistricting saga for congressional districts has finally been settled, and if all goes well, these maps will be in place until 2032. To discuss the state's newest congressional map and how it all unfolded, we're joined by Bill Mahoney of POLITICO and David Lombardo of the Capitol Pressroom. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
Now, there's a lot to get to, of course, but I wanted to start at the very top of the week. We know the Democratic legislature voted to reject the congressional map that was produced by the IRC. Did this come as a surprise, or was the writing on the wall here?
It was a bit of a surprise, at least compared to a few weeks ago. There had been a general sense in the legislature that a lot of members just wanted to end what had become a four-year redistricting process and didn't want to drag this out too much further. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like they, if there were reasonable lines from the commission, it seemed likely they would accept it. But it seems in the end, a lot of these members wound up saying, you know what, the members who didn't want to spend too much more time focusing on it, they were willing to go along with their colleagues who wanted to keep this as an issue. And so they did wind up over the 2 weeks between when the commission introduced its maps and the legislature voted on it. They came out against it and voted it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in hindsight, it seems like the writing was probably on the wall, that there was going to be pressure from national Democrats and progressive groups that might make it impossible for the state legislature, and the Democrats specifically, to just rubber stamp whatever the bipartisan commission came up with. But I, like Bill, kind of thought that this was going to be sort of a, let's just get out of here and forget about redistricting until 2030. Clearly, that was wrong, but I think what they ended up doing wasn't necessarily as big of a swing as people thought they might do once they did try to open the process up again.
Right. And Bill, can you talk to some of those changes in the Democratic map versus the map that was submitted by the commission?
There wasn't much, to be honest.
Right.
Like, the general theme of the maps that were released by the commission were basically working off of the maps drawn by the court 2 years ago and not making any drastic changes. Really, all the commission had done was they made the Syracuse area seat that's held by Republican Brendan Williams. They had added a couple of outlying a couple of nearby places like Auburn and Cortland to the district, which made it a bit more Democratic friendly, which Democrats had certainly been hoping for, but not as Democratic friendly as they could have if they had added places like Ithaca. And there were mostly minor adjustments to other parts of the state where we saw a couple of districts get like 1% more Democratic, 1% more Republican, but nothing drastic. And the legislative maps pretty much worked off of those. They made some changes to some of the parts that were in some districts in the Hudson Valley. There were some relatively small tweaks in places like New York City and Long Island, but they were 95% the same in pretty much every corner of the state, at least, if not more. And some of them were identical to the maps drawn by the commission.
So is it fair to say that Democrats learned from past mistakes when their map was struck down in previous years because there were, just a perspective that it had been heavily gerrymandered?
That was probably a part of it, where they probably did have a more favorable court system and a path to victory in the courts this time around than they would have a couple of years ago. But this goes back to the idea that a lot of the legislatures didn't want this to drag out too much longer, and they didn't want this to turn into another year-long, 2-year-long fight over this. And so I do think a big part of the motivation was that the legislature wanted to assert their prerogative to draw these lines in the future, saying that this is the legislature's power, and this is not something that should be done by the courts or a bipartisan commission, that the legislature has final say. And the way this played out, where they drew these maps that some Republicans supported in the end, it left it pretty clear that this is something that the legislature will have the right to handle as they see fit in the future.
And I wanted to unpack the Court of Appeals and how that might have impacted the way things played out this year. We know that previously the Court of Appeals, they shut down the Democratic maps, but then last year, and they kicked the responsibility to the IRC and a special master to produce the maps. But then last year, they came back and said, there needs to be a new congressional map. So how did the change in the makeup of the Court of Appeals potentially impacted the way things played out this time?
If you go back to the court battles from 2022, there were 13 judges who weighed in at various levels about the lines and what constitutes an illegal gerrymander. The one judge who gave the Democrats the most leniency in an opinion in terms of what they could do with the maps and saying they could basically, coming close to saying that they could draw the maps as they wanted, was Rowan Wilson, who was an associate judge on the Court of Appeals at that time and wrote a dissenting opinion when the Court of Appeals ruled in favor of Republicans. But he is now, chief judge of the state. He has tremendous sway over the court, and there's been another seat that's swapped that probably would have been more Democratic friendly had this come up before. The Democrats also passed this law that said that the cases could only start in a handful of courts, all of which are in Democratic counties. So it would have been a much tougher path for Republicans to win a legal battle this time around.
And what's interesting to me is the debate on the floor. In the maps that were produced by the IRC, a lot of the Republicans were saying that Democrats were acting unconstitutionally, but then in the map that the Democrats produced, a lot of the Republicans voted with Democrats. So was this idea that Democrats were acting unconstitutional just political fodder, or is it okay because the maps didn't change that much?
Well, ironically, the reason that the legislature has the power to approve the maps as they want is because Republicans fought in 2012 when this whole constitutional amendment creating the structure for redistricting that we have now was being debated. Andrew Cuomo had theoretically been pushing for a truly fully independent redistricting process where a commission could draw their own lines and do whatever they want. But the Republicans who held control in the state Senate were nervous about what that could mean in a blue state, and they had fought against giving this commission too much power, and basically led to this amendment that we have now that governs how this whole process works, that says the legislature shall have the power to vote on the final maps in the end and can change them if they want.
And Dave, did we get any insight on when the legislature was kind of ideating over these maps?
So both the Senate and Assembly Democratic leaders have been very coy about the process of actually writing these maps. The only thing that they will say in concrete terms is that they were finalized in the wake of the legislature rejecting the lines from the commission. But it's clear that these lines were not drawn up in a couple hours. This is something that the legislature and the Democratic leaders had been thinking about for at least days since the redistricting lines came out, more than a week earlier from the commission. The legislature has institutional staff in this committee, this so-called LAT4 task force that has the capacity to work on this and clearly was working on this. If we're talking with lawmakers, they clearly had ideas about maps that were coming together. So this was something that was in the works and then finalized Monday earlier this week.
So from your purview, why are the Democrats in the legislature being coy on this issue?
So I think they could be a little gun-shy, or at least were a little gun-shy, based on the idea that there might be a legal challenge, and they didn't want to say something that could potentially be used against them in a court case. Since the lines have been approved, and as you said, with some Republican support, we've heard from Republican leaders across the state that there won't be a legal challenge. That doesn't say that there won't be some from maybe a random Republican or conservative or just concerned citizen, but without a legal challenge, it kind of negates that necessary coyness that I was mentioning earlier, that they're going to have these statements used against them in court. And I also think, though, there's the possibility that maybe the Assembly and Senate weren't necessarily on the same page as they were approaching redistricting. The Senate Democrats have traditionally, since they took the majority, been a little more activist since 2019 compared to the Assembly Democrats. So maybe they weren't lockstep with their Assembly colleagues, and maybe that's something they don't want to talk about because they want to appear like they're all marching to the same drum beat right now.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting. A lot of the high-ranking Republicans came out and said, you know, we're not necessarily looking to sue, but is there an opportunity for an independent challenge in the courts?
Well, the great thing about New York is that you can sue anybody for anything. So anybody could bring a case. You'd have to decide whether they had standing to actually bring a case, whether they were an aggrieved party in some way. And like Bill mentioned earlier, you'd have to bring one of those cases through 4 different courts that are all a little more friendly to Democrats than, say, a state Supreme Court judge out in Steuben County. So it would be more of an uphill battle if someone did decide to bring a legal case in this matter.
Yeah, and if you go back to the 2022 cases, there were 2 reasons the maps were struck down. One was because they didn't follow the process for drawing the maps themselves, which they seem to have corrected this time around. 2, there was, especially at the lower courts, the question of if it was a Democratic gerrymander. And we don't have perfect guidance from the courts as to how we determine if something is a gerrymander in New York. But one of the things that came up repeatedly was that there were no Republicans who voted in favor of the lines. And that by itself could be seen as evidence of a gerrymander. This time, that's gone. We had, I believe, 15 total, 16 maybe total Republicans in the legislature vote for the line. So it wasn't unanimous support, but there was some bipartisan support there.
And we know both parties are vying to gain control of the House of Representatives. So how might this whole redistricting saga and congressional maps impact the way that voters are approaching the polls in November?
So I think these maps need to be considered as favorable to Democrats. These seats, while may be represented by Republicans in, say, the Hudson Valley and on Long Island, are seats that would have voted overwhelmingly for incumbent President Joe Biden in 2020. So I think Democrats need to feel pretty good about the starting position, even if they are running against Republican incumbents. And I think now we just need to watch and see what some of these Democratic candidates can do, what the national mood is like, because there are winnable seats that Democrats could flip moving forward in the fall.
Yeah, and New York has been the big battleground throughout the country for this entire election cycle, in part because Democrats underperformed so much in 2022 compared to the rest of the country that there were seats they could have won that they didn't, that now seem like they might have a better chance in a presidential year. And particularly if you go to the Syracuse area, this Brendan Williams seat, that makes it even more likely that they'll have a path to winning the seat. It's not guaranteed, of course. We've seen them lose plenty of elections in that seat, in particular over the past decade, that they've started an election year saying that they're going to win. But it does give them an easier path in a couple of these battlegrounds.
So is the redistricting saga finally over? We know that if these maps are, if all goes well, they will be in place until 2032. And I know you guys don't have a crystal ball, but is it safe to say everything is fine and we won't have to revisit this until 2032?
I think there's going to be a post-mortem and an evaluation specifically by good government groups who are going to push for a more independent process moving forward. And I don't know whether the legislature will decide to reopen this issue, but I will say that if they ever decide to take a stab at changing the process in any meaningful way, it's going to include that final check that the legislature has in the current process. Democrats aren't going to give away that authority that they have to be the final say on the lines. So I wouldn't expect this process to be dramatically different in 2030, 2032.
And notably, though, the Redistricting Commission says it's not going away. We'll see if they actually have any funding in the budget that gets approved in a month. But commissioners have said they plan to stick around after this all wraps up and hold some hearings this spring to figure out how the process worked and to make recommendations for amending the process going forward. So it probably is something we'll talk about, at least to a degree, the remainder of even this year. And before we know it, we'll be appointing the 2032 Commission in just about 5 years, 10 months, and 29 days.
Well, we'll have to keep watch, but unfortunately, we have to leave it here for now. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
And we were speaking with David Lombardo of the Capitol Pressroom and Bill Mahoney of POLITICO.